Hey everybody, I am live. This is my first Facebook Live by myself without the training wheels of Fran and Aurelia here to help me. I am not the most technologically savvy person, so in fact my laptop wasn't working, the camera and the microphone, so I'm having to do this from my phone, so I'm sorry if this comes across as a little bit of Blair Witch televangelist edition. We're going to get through it though. I see some folks jumping on. Hi, everybody. Glad you're here. So first, let me give you a little tour. This is where all the magic happens here at my desk. Got a book there by the Chinese Christian artist He Qi, He space Qi. Highly recommend his work. Got some artwork back there. Got Fillmore, the VW bus. Got a great book called The New Jim Crow. You absolutely need to read that. And then just other stuff. Okay, looks like we've had plenty of people jump on. We were in the midst of a Lenten sermon series about reputation, but we decided to make some changes to match this context that we're in right now with coronavirus. And I was scheduled to speak this Sunday, but as the week unfolded, Aurelia, Fran, and I thought about, what do we say? How do we speak to the lived situation that we're all in right now? And we came to the very Christian phrase of loving our neighbor as ourselves, and that's how we're framing and marketing what we're doing right now. And we came to the broader story surrounding that phrase in our scriptures about the Good Samaritan as a way to try to navigate this time. So let me read that story for you, and then I have just a few quick thoughts. I see everybody's comments. Hi, everybody. Okay, Luke 10:25-36. It says, "A lawyer stood up to test Jesus, saying, 'Teacher, what do I do to inherit eternal life?' And Jesus said to him, 'Well, what's written in the law? Have you read it?' And he said, 'Well, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and you should love your neighbor as yourself.' And Jesus said to him, 'You've answered correctly. Do these things, and you'll live.' But the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, 'Well, who's my neighbor?' Jesus replied, 'Let me tell you a story. Glad you asked. There was a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that same road, and when he saw him, he crossed over and passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite. When he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' And then Jesus asked the lawyer, 'Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?'" We hear the voice of God in the reading of these sacred words. Thanks be to God. I trust you joined in with me on there. So let me just make a few quick points about this story. First, we have the Samaritan. He's the unlikely hero of the story. In our context today, we might say he's a Russian, or he's a Chinese person, or he's a Muslim. He's this unlikely hero. But Jesus highlights him as the hero. And what we see is that he is prepared to help the man who was overcome by the robbers. He had enough money set aside to be able to take care of him, and he had the margin available in his schedule to be able to care for this man. Notice that he didn't have so many bags of coins weighing him down. His animal wasn't so overburdened with stuff that he couldn't carry this man to safety. He had enough, but not too much. He had prepared, but not hoarded. I'm sure you, like me, are feeling the fears of scarcity that all of a sudden have popped up in our context. Maybe you've seen people fighting over toilet paper in stores. If or when our situation deteriorates, my challenge to you Can you walk that line between being prepared and free versus hoarding and burdened? I can't tell you what that line is for you. That's between you and God. But a good litmus test will be if you have some margin in your life to be able to care for someone around you who desperately needs it. That's point number one. Point number two, the Samaritan's moral code revolves around what this man needs from him. The priest and the Levite in the story, they avoided the man because of their own needs. Maybe they were afraid that the robbers who had done this to this man were still in the area, and the priest and the Levite wanted to get the heck out of there. Maybe they were afraid of losing income if they became ritually unclean and thus unable to do their jobs in the temple. Maybe they were simply running late and in a hurry, and they didn't have time to help this man. I have a lot of empathy for these guys, and I can easily see myself making similar decisions based on these reasons. But the Samaritan seems to be operating from a different perspective. He seems to be operating from the perspective of, how would this man who's been robbed and beaten and left for dead, how would he want me to act right now? Or what is in this man's best interest? This is, of course, the definition of love that we've proposed to you all many, many times. As you navigate this pandemic, ask yourself, what is in my neighbor's best interest right now? What do they need from me? Do they need me to social distance? Do they need me to bring them some Clorox wipes? What do they need? This is the ethic that is guiding the Samaritan's behavior. Now, to be clear, let me be very clear. There is no moral imperative that you or I become martyrs. There is no rule that says we have to put ourselves out there and endanger ourselves. But I've heard a priest say that I follow, I've heard him say a couple times now, there have been a lot of things that have been canceled because of the coronavirus, but love is not one of those things. So what is in our neighbor's best interest right now? Keep that in mind. Number three, the third thing is the question arises of who are we called to help? I mean, that was the whole question that started this parable that Jesus is telling. And the lawyer who posed the question, perhaps he's jingling the few coins that he has in his pocket, and he asks for some specificity in who to love as he loves himself because he has scarce resources, like all of us. I get that. It's totally reasonable. I would ask the same thing. None of us have unlimited resources. None of us are going to be the saviors of Williamson County. In the 1970s, Father Gustavo Gutierrez, a Catholic priest in Latin America, he led a movement that's come to be called Liberation Theology, in which he explains how the entire Old and New Testaments are meant to show us that God stands on the outside of power, on the margins of society, with the poor, the powerless, the marginalized, the oppressed. He said, if you want to find God, you will find God among the oppressed and the marginalized, not necessarily at the center where all the power resides. He said simply, God picks sides. This was referred to as God's preferential option for the poor, and it meant that all of our decisions should take into consideration how they will impact those who are outside the circle of power. Fran Aurelia and I, as well as the SLC, we've tried to let that be our guiding principle as we made the decision to cancel in-person meetings for the time being. Instead of saying, it's probably not going to impact us, we said this has the potential to really hurt some of our vulnerable community members and people that they love. And if we have to choose sides, we choose the side of the vulnerable. I'm going to go off script here for just a second and say, I hope our leaders are thinking similarly as they develop responses and policies, economic policies, healthcare measures, all these things. I hope they are thinking about the most vulnerable and not necessarily those who are at the center of society. That's my prayer. All right, back on script. Likewise, the preferential option for the poor or vulnerable is a pretty good rule of thumb for decision making in times like this. It calls us to look out for those left out. Look out for those left out. Maybe that means it's the kids in your neighborhood that'll be out of school now and bored to tears. Maybe that means it's your neighbor whose income will go away under a forced quarantine. Maybe it's the neighbor who needs a gallon of bleach or some wipes and didn't get to the store in time before they ran out, or they're not one of the lucky ones who has time to wait in line right now to get these things. We are called to look out for those left out, and it seems to be the kind of choice that the Samaritan made in that moment. These are some very brief thoughts about how you might navigate this situation through the lens of one of our most famous gospel stories. I don't want to give you absolutes like you may only purchase 10 cans of soup and 1 package of toilet paper. That's silly. I'm not going to give you moral imperatives or absolutes around this. Instead, I want you to work out your faith with fear and trembling, as we are told to do in our scriptures. And I offer you these 3 simple points. Prepare, but don't hoard. Number 2, consider what's in the best interest of your neighbor as you weigh it with your own needs. And number 3, look out for those left out. May our love for Jesus and his peaceable kingdom be our guide throughout this time. Practically speaking, Aurelia, Fran, and I, as well as the deacons and the Servant Leadership Council of Peace, we're all very engaged and available to serve our community, to serve you all and one another. We're trying to take proactive and forward-leaning approaches to all this. Please keep us up to date if there's anything that you need from the community right now and how we can help us each serve one another. Last, be mindful of how you personally and your family manifest anxiety. And in those moments, remember to pause and to breathe, to remember that God is with you through all of this. Take in a deep breath and let God's presence fill your heart and your mind and your soul so that we can live and embody the love of God and neighbor for one another. Fran is going to jump on right now as I step off. Please don't leave. You'll see her. I love you all.